Something is not right in this village. That was the first thought that crossed Justin's mind when he arrived at Irako village after a long journey. He had traveled far and wide, but he had never seen a place like this before. The villagers were strong and healthy, their skin glowed under the sun, yet no one was bathing. For days, he watched in disbelief. Not once did he see a single person fetch water to bathe. Even the little children, who should be playing in the river, ran around covered in dust, yet their skin looked fresh and smooth. There were no rashes, no boils, no foul smells. And the strangest part? No one ever fell sick. Not even a headache. Justin's curiosity got the best of him. He decided to ask someone about it. He approached an elderly man sitting under a huge baobab tree, chewing on a stick. "Baba, please don't be angry. I have been here for a week now, and I have noticed something strange." The old man squinted at him. "Strange? What do you mean, my son? No one in this village takes a bath." The old man laughed heartily, his toothless gums showing. "Ah, so you've noticed. You are sharp, young man. But tell me, have you ever seen anyone in this village sick?" Justin hesitated. "No, and that is the second strange thing. Everywhere else, people get sick from time to time, but here, nothing." The old man's laughter faded, and his face grew serious. He leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "There is a reason for that, my son. But it is not something we discuss with outsiders." Justin's heart raced. There was a mystery here, and he was determined to uncover it. That night, when the village was asleep, he crept out of his hut and wandered the streets, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain this mystery. But the more he searched, the more confused he became. Then, something happened. At the far end of the village, near the dense forest, he saw a woman standing alone. She was different from the others, her eyes carried a deep sadness, and her skin was covered in sweat, as though she had been running. "You are not from here," she said before he could speak. Justin nodded. "Yes. And I have so many questions." The woman took a deep breath. "Do you really want to know the truth?" Justin swallowed hard. "Yes." She hesitated, then glanced around as if making sure no one was listening. Then, in a whisper, she said, "In this village, no one bathes because the water is cursed. And no one falls sick, because we have already paid the price." Justin felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" The woman grabbed his hand and squeezed it tightly. "You must leave this village before it's too late." Justin's blood ran cold. What was happening in Irako village? What had they done? And what price had they paid? He was about to ask more questions when he heard a rustling sound behind him. Someone was watching them. And that was when he realized, he might not leave this village alive. The woman's grip on Justin's wrist tightened as she whispered urgently, "Never take a bath in this village. No matter how dirty you feel, no matter how much you itch, do not let water touch your skin." Justin's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "Why? What happens if I do?" Her eyes darted around in fear. "That is not a question you want answered." Before he could press further, the rustling sound behind them grew louder. A cold wind swept through the trees, and suddenly, a low growl echoed in the darkness. The woman's face went pale. "They know we are talking." "Who?" Justin whispered. She yanked him into the shadows. "Don't turn around. Don't run. Just walk back to your hut. Slowly." Justin did as she said, his body stiff with terror. He could feel something watching him, something not human. He wanted to turn, to see what it was, but the woman's warning rang in his ears. As they moved, the growling grew softer until it disappeared completely. Only then did the woman breathe out in relief. "You are lucky," she said. "If you had looked, they would have taken you." Justin swallowed hard. "Who, or what, are they?" She shook her head. "I have said too much already. But if you value your life, listen to me, never ask about the sickness. Never ask about the water. And whatever you do, never bathe." Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the night. The next morning, Justin sat outside his hut, deep in thought. His skin felt sticky with sweat, and dust clung to his body. The temptation to wash up was unbearable. "This is madness," he muttered to himself. Then, he spotted a little boy running barefoot across the dusty road. His face was covered in dirt, but he was laughing, full of energy, full of life. Justin called him over. "My little friend, don't you ever feel like washing yourself?" The boy's smile faded instantly. He took a nervous step back. "Mama says we must never wash. The water, it takes people." "Takes people? What do you mean?" The boy shook his head, his small hands trembling. Then, without another word, he ran off. Justin exhaled sharply. The entire village was hiding something. And he was going to find out what it was. That night, he made the worst mistake of his life. Unable to bear the filth any longer, he fetched a small bowl of water from the village well and stepped behind his hut. Just a quick rinse, he told himself. Just enough to cool off. He dipped his hands into the water and splashed his face. Instant relief. But the moment the droplets touched his skin, the air around him changed. The night became unnaturally silent. No crickets. No wind. Then, a soft whisper. "You have broken the rule." Justin froze. His breathing grew shallow. The whisper didn't come from one place, it came from everywhere. Then, from the darkness, something began to emerge. A shadow, darker than the night itself, took form before him. It had no face, no eyes, just a shifting, writhing mass that pulsed with an eerie glow. Justin stumbled backward, his wet hands shaking. Then the whisper turned into a growl. "Now, you belong to us." The shadow lunged. And Justin's scream was swallowed by the night. Justin felt an icy grip around his throat as the shadow lunged at him. His scream never left his lips, it was stolen, swallowed by the thing that had come for him. The darkness wrapped around his body like a second skin, suffocating, burning, pulling. His feet lifted off the ground. His body convulsed as an unbearable cold seeped into his bones. Images flashed before his eyes, faces distorted in agony, hands clawing at the air, mouths open in silent screams. He saw people. Many people. Hundreds. And they were all inside the darkness. Trapped. A voice, not one but thousands speaking as one, whispered in his ears, "You bathed. Now, you must join us." With all his strength, Justin fought. He thrashed against the force pulling him, his mind screaming for help, for escape. His hands flailed, his fingers clutching at nothing, until, suddenly, he grabbed something solid. The ground. He didn't know how, but his hands were buried in the dry earth. Instinct took over, he grabbed a fistful of dust and smeared it over his wet face. The moment the dirt touched his skin, the shadow recoiled. A deafening screech ripped through the night as the darkness shattered apart. The grip on his throat loosened, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. His body trembled violently, his chest rising and falling in desperate, ragged breaths. The silence was gone. The night sounds had returned, crickets chirping, the rustling of the trees, the distant murmur of village life. It was as if nothing had happened. But Justin knew better. He sat there, shaking, staring at the bowl of water that had nearly cost him his life. The water was cursed. And yet, that was only half the story. The real question was, why? Please subscribe. The next morning, Justin sought out the old man under the baobab tree. This time, he wasn't asking. This time, he was demanding answers. "Baba," he said, his voice firm. "I bathed last night." The old man stiffened. His chewing stick fell from his lips. "I almost died," Justin continued. "Something came for me. A shadow. A thing." The old man's eyes darkened. "Then you are lucky to be standing here, my son." Justin leaned in. "Tell me the truth. What is happening in this village?" The old man sighed deeply. Then, he pointed at the ground. "Sit." Justin obeyed. "Many years ago," the old man began, "this village was like any other. People bathed. People fell sick. People lived and died naturally." He paused, his wrinkled fingers tracing patterns in the dust. Then came the sickness. Justin's breath hitched. "It started with small things," the old man continued. "A cough here, a fever there. But it spread. It worsened. Soon, the people were dying by the dozens. The river ran red with the bodies of our dead." Justin shivered. The village elders pleaded with the gods, with the spirits, with anyone who would listen. And then, he came. "Who?" Justin asked. The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. "The one who cured us. The one who gave us this gift." Justin frowned. "Gift?" The old man nodded. "A gift of health. A gift of strength. A gift that ensured we would never be sick again. But in return, we could never bathe." Justin's stomach twisted. "And those who do?" The old man's face turned grim. "They become part of the sickness. They become part of him." Justin's heart pounded. He remembered the shadows, the screaming faces, the chilling whisper, "Now, you belong to us." "Baba," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Who is he?" The old man exhaled slowly, as if the very name carried a weight too heavy to bear. "We do not speak his name," he said. "But we know what he is. He is the one who took our sickness, and in return, he takes our souls. He lives beneath the water, in the depths of the river we no longer touch. The moment water touches your skin, he knows. He sees. And he comes to claim what is his." Justin felt cold all over again. The water was cursed. The sickness had been taken, but not destroyed. It had been given to something else. Something dark. Something ancient. And last night, it had tried to take him too. The old man placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You are lucky, my son. But luck does not last forever. If you wish to live, you must leave this village. Justin looked into the old man's eyes and saw fear. Deep, unwavering fear. But something inside him refused to run. He had come here seeking answers. And now, he had found something far worse. He was no longer just a visitor. He was involved. And the real horror? The one who cursed this village was still watching. Justin sat frozen, his breath uneven, his mind racing. Leave the village? It was the obvious choice. But his gut told him something was wrong, something worse than just the curse. He looked at the old man. Baba, if leaving was that easy, why are you still here? The old man exhaled, his fingers tightening around his staff. Because, my son, we cannot leave. Justin's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The old man's voice lowered to a whisper. Have you ever heard of a village where no one bathes? Where no one falls sick? Justin shook his head. The old man nodded. That is because no one leaves here alive to tell the story. Justin swallowed hard. Then the old man's eyes flickered toward something behind him. Justin followed his gaze and saw the villagers watching them. Men, women, children, all standing still, their eyes dark, too dark. Some peeked from behind their huts, others stood in plain sight, their expressions blank but their presence suffocating. Justin's heartbeat pounded in his ears. How long have they been standing there? The old man's grip on his staff tightened. They know what you did last night. Justin's stomach twisted. The villagers knew. But how? Then it hit him. The whisper. You have broken the rule. It hadn't just been speaking to him. It had been telling them. The realization sent ice through his veins. He turned back to the old man. What happens now? The old man's lips barely moved. Run. Justin was on his feet before the word fully left the old man's mouth. The villagers moved at once. Not walked. Not ran. They glided. Their feet barely touched the ground as they advanced. Their faces were empty, their eyes hollow, but their mouths moved. Whispering. The same voice from last night, but now multiplied 100-fold. You bathed. You belong to him. You cannot leave. Justin bolted, his legs pumping, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know where he was running, only that he needed to get away. He dashed between huts, kicking up dust, weaving through narrow paths. The whispers followed, growing louder, closer. Then he saw it. The village entrance. He sprinted toward it, his lungs burning, his vision blurring. 10 more steps. 9. 8. The ground shook. 7. 6. The sky darkened. 5. 4. A deep, guttural growl filled the air. 3. 2. And then. The ground split open beneath him. Justin tumbled, arms flailing, into blackness. Please subscribe. Silence. Then, a breath. Not his. Justin opened his eyes. He was no longer in the village. He was somewhere else. Somewhere deep. The air was thick, damp, suffocating. The walls around him were not of earth, but flesh. A tunnel, made of something alive. A low, rumbling voice echoed all around him. You tried to leave. Justin scrambled backward, his hands slipping against the pulsating ground. You broke the rule. The darkness around him moved. Shapes slithered through the walls, whispering, giggling, weeping. Then, he saw them. Faces. Hundreds of them, trapped inside the walls. Mouths frozen in silent screams, eyes hollow with terror. Justin choked on his breath. They were the ones who had bathed. The voice grew louder. Now, you will join them. The walls opened. A hand, long, black, and dripping with something thick, reached for him. Justin screamed. Justin gasped as the monstrous hand reached for him, its fingers long and slick with darkness. The walls around him pulsed, faces twisting in agony. The voices grew deafening. You will join us. You belong to him now. The air turned suffocating. The shadows tightened around his throat. Justin's mind raced. This was it. This was the end. And then. Jesus! The name tore from his lips, raw and desperate. A blinding light exploded from nowhere, cutting through the suffocating blackness. The walls shuddered, the whispers turned into piercing shrieks. The monstrous hand recoiled as if burned. The faces in the walls, hundreds of them, turned upward. Hope flickered in their hollow eyes before they vanished. The darkness collapsed in on itself. The tunnel twisted and imploded. And Justin fell. Fell. Until. Thud. His body hit the hard, dry earth. He gasped, sucking in fresh air, his heart hammering. He was no longer in the abyss. No longer in that unholy place. He was back at the village outskirts. The sun was rising. The village behind him was silent. For a long time, Justin just lay there, shaking, staring at the sky. He was alive. But something told him, this wasn't over. Hours passed before Justin gathered the strength to check his phone. He hadn't looked at it since arriving at the village, and now, with trembling fingers, he unlocked the screen. His notifications were insane. Thousands of missed calls. DMs flooded his inbox. His last post, about the strange village where no one bathed or got sick, had gone viral. #TheVillageThatNeverBathes was trending worldwide. Justin scrolled through the comments, his heart pounding. Is this real? This has to be a horror movie script. We need to send a rescue team. I need to see this place with my own eyes. This is demonic. Someone call a pastor. Religious groups, charity organizations, and investigative journalists were all over it. Then, one DM caught his eye. It was from a church. Mr. Justin, we have been following your story. Our senior pastor is very interested in the village. We believe there is something deeply spiritual happening there. Please come see us immediately. Justin's breath hitched. A church? Interested in the village? Something inside him told him this wasn't just a random offer. They knew something. And if they knew something, it meant this story wasn't over. Justin took a deep breath. He had barely escaped with his life. But now, with the whole world watching, with powerful eyes turning toward the village, he realized something terrifying. He had only scratched the surface. Justin arrived at Grace Covenant Church with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. His heart still raced from his near-death experience, and his mind was flooded with questions. The church was a massive structure with a tall golden cross towering above its entrance. People moved around in quiet reverence, but Justin had no time to admire the scenery. As he entered, a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt and black trousers stepped forward to meet him. His face was calm, but his eyes, those eyes, held deep memories. You must be Justin, the man said. Yes, sir, Justin replied. The man studied him for a moment before nodding. I am Reverend James. We need to talk. Inside the pastor's office, Justin wasted no time. He laid everything out, how he had stumbled upon the village, the eerie rule about never bathing, the strange sickness that never came, the whispers, the cursed abyss. Everything. Reverend James sat still, hands clasped, listening carefully. When Justin finished, the pastor exhaled deeply, rubbing his chin. I thought it was just a nightmare, he murmured. What do you mean? Justin asked, leaning forward. Reverend James' gaze became distant, as if staring into the past. I was born in that village, he admitted. Justin's eyes widened. You were? The pastor nodded. I escaped as a child. Justin's pulse quickened. How? Reverend James sighed. I don't know. I don't remember everything. My mother woke me in the middle of the night. She was terrified. She wrapped me in a cloth and whispered, never look back. Run and don't stop running. Did she escape with you? Justin asked. The pastor's jaw tightened. No. She pushed me forward and turned back. That was the last time I saw her. A heavy silence filled the room. How did you forget all of this? Justin finally asked. Reverend James shook his head. I was just a boy. I grew up believing it was just a terrifying dream. Over the years, the memories faded. I searched for my village once, but I could never find it. I convinced myself it wasn't real. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Justin. But now I know it was real. Justin nodded. It is. And it needs help. The pastor's face hardened. Then we must go back. Reverend James wasted no time. He picked up his phone and made a call. Caleb, it's James. I need your help. It's urgent. Within the hour, Mr. Caleb, a tall man with sharp eyes and a kind face, arrived at the church. He was the founder of Hope Mission, a powerful charitable NGO known for tackling some of the toughest humanitarian crises. Justin explained the situation again. When he finished, Caleb sat back, stunned. An entire village, forgotten by time? A place where no one bathes and no one falls sick, he murmured. Reverend James nodded. And something far worse lurking beneath. Caleb exhaled, then smiled. Then we go in. They began drafting a plan. Assemble a team, doctors, researchers, pastors, and exorcists, just in case. Media coverage, the world needed to see this. Justin called his boss, who was immediately thrilled by the exclusive story. Logistics, transport, food supplies, medicine, and, most importantly, security. Justin's posts exploded again. This time, they didn't just go viral. They caused a worldwide frenzy. The biggest media outlets picked up the story. Experts debated the mystery on live TV. Social media was flooded with hashtags. #TheVillageThatNeverBathes. #UncoverTheTruth. #PrayForTheForgottenVillage. Village. People demanded answers. Within days, funds started pouring in. Caleb's NGO received millions in donations to help the village. And then, Justin's boss promoted him. "You've done what no journalist has ever done," his boss said, shaking his hand. "You're our lead investigator now." Justin was overwhelmed. Everything was happening so fast. But deep down, he knew one thing. Going back was dangerous. The village wasn't just a mystery. It was a trap. And the real question was, would they all make it out alive? Please subscribe. The convoy of vehicles pulled up just outside the mysterious village. Justin stepped out, adjusting his camera strap while scanning the eerie settlement before him. The village was strangely quiet. No children ran around playing. No market women called out to sell their wares. The air was thick, almost suffocating, with an unsettling stillness. Reverend James and his team of pastors wasted no time. They had been fasting for days, preparing for this moment. Without a word, they split into groups and began moving around the perimeter of the village, praying and anointing the land. Meanwhile, Justin, his boss, and Mr. Caleb walked into the heart of the village. All eyes were on them. Suspicious gazes followed their every step. The villagers whispered in hushed tones. At the palace, Chief Rafa sat on his wooden throne, dressed in flowing traditional robes, his sharp eyes gleaming with both amusement and wariness. "You say you are here to help us?" he asked, chuckling. "Tell me, what problems do we have?" An old man from the Council of Elders suddenly stepped forward. His frail body shook with anger as he pointed a bony finger at the chief. "Enough, Rafa," he spat. "Do not mock these men. Tell them about our taboos. Tell them why no one dares to bathe. Tell them why we live in fear." Chief Rafa's smirk faded. His eyes darkened. Then, as if suddenly remembering the presence of the media, he leaned forward and motioned for Mr. Caleb to come closer. "Listen," he said in a hushed voice. "You and your people can do whatever you like in this village, as long as you compensate me properly." Mr. Caleb raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "We didn't come here to do business, Chief. We came to help solve the no-bathing issue." At those words, the chief's demeanor changed instantly. His amusement vanished, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. He slammed his staff against the ground. "You fools," he bellowed. "How dare you? That is the most sacred law of our ancestors. No one, and no one, will break it while I live." The entire village went silent. Justin instinctively raised his camera, ready to capture the dramatic confrontation. But before he could press record, Reverend James entered the palace. The chief turned, his mouth still open mid-rant. Then, his eyes widened. His face twisted in shock. His staff slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. His lips trembled as he pointed at the pastor and gasped. "Deo? Deo, my son? Please subscribe." A collective gasp rippled through the palace. Justin's boss shot him a sharp look. "Did he just say, son?" Reverend James stiffened. "What did you just call me?" Chief Rafa took a shaky step forward, his expression torn between disbelief and desperation. "Deo, you were my firstborn. My heir. You were taken from me." Reverend James' heart pounded. His mind raced. "No. No, that's impossible." His voice was barely a whisper. The chief's voice trembled. "You were just a boy when your mother ran with you. She stole you away from me in the middle of the night." Reverend James staggered back. All his life, he had believed his mother took him away to protect him from something evil. But now, was his own father that evil? "You mean to tell me, you are my father?" Chief Rafa's face hardened. "Yes. And you have no right to be here." A tense silence fell. Then, a distant, blood-curdling scream shattered the air. Everyone froze. Justin turned toward the sound. It came from outside the village. From the direction where Reverend James' pastors had been praying. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. "Where are the others?" Mr. Caleb asked, his voice tight with dread. The village perimeter, where the prayer team had stood just moments ago, was empty. They were gone. A low, deep rumbling sound rose from the earth. Villagers began backing away, clutching their children. Some bolted into their huts. Chief Rafa grinned. "You shouldn't have come back, Deo." Reverend James turned sharply to the chief. "What did you do?" The chief's expression darkened. "You have already disturbed the balance," he said. "And now, they have awakened." Justin's pulse quickened. "Who are they?" he demanded. Chief Rafa smiled cruelly. "You will find out soon enough." Then, from deep within the forest, a second scream erupted. This time, it was closer. Justin's breath caught in his throat. Reverend James clenched his fists. "We have to go after them." Caleb grabbed his arm. "Are you crazy? We don't even know what's in that forest." Reverend James pulled free. "I left my men out there. I will not abandon them." Justin knew there was no stopping him. And deep down, he also knew. Whatever had taken those pastors, was waiting for them. The forest was dense and suffocatingly humid. Thick vines twisted around ancient trees, their gnarled branches forming eerie shapes against the evening sky. Reverend James, Justin, Mr. Caleb, and the camera crew pushed forward, their breaths heavy with tension. The distant scuffle of feet and muffled shouts led them deeper in. Then, they saw them. A violent struggle was underway. The pastors were locked in a tussle with strange men clad in raffia garments, their faces smeared with dark ink. Justin's hands instinctively lifted his camera. Click. The sound was like a gunshot in the eerie silence. The ink-faced guards turned sharply. Their eyes widened in panic as they spotted the cameras. They bolted. "Hey!" Justin shouted. "Stop them!" But before anyone could react, Reverend James took one commanding step forward. His voice thundered through the forest. "Stop!" The command cut through the air like a blade. The guards froze mid-step. They turned slowly, uneasy, their eyes darting between the cameras and Reverend James. Something about his voice, his presence, made them hesitate. His next words dripped with barely controlled anger. "What is the meaning of this?" No one spoke. Then, suddenly, one of the younger guards stepped forward. His voice trembled, but his eyes burned with defiance. "Brother Deo." The forest went still. Justin's stomach flipped. Did he just say, "Brother Deo"? Reverend James took a sharp breath. The young guard's face twisted with frustration. He clenched his fists and shouted, "I'm tired of this charade." Silence. The other guards stared at him in shock. The chief's guards never disobeyed. Never spoke out. But this one, he was about to break the silence that had bound this village for decades. Justin raised his camera again. "Tell us everything." The young guard swallowed hard. His voice wavered at first but then steadied as he began his tale. "It started with one of the pastors," the young guard explained. "He was thirsty, he had no idea what he was doing. He opened his bottled water, took a drink, and then..." His voice dropped. He washed his face. A cold wave of dread washed over the group. Reverend James clenched his fists. "That was all?" "Yes," the guard nodded. "But the moment the water touched his face, we knew he had broken the taboo. The Watchers, the ones who guard the village from the shadows, they saw him." Justin's throat was dry. "And then?" "Then we took him," the young guard admitted. The older guards shifted uncomfortably. "We had to," he continued. "If anyone bathes, if anyone lets water touch their skin for cleansing, the curse awakens." Please subscribe. Curse? Mr. Caleb frowned. "You mean the no-bathing rule is tied to some curse?" The young guard nodded gravely. "Our ancestors were desperate. There was a sickness, a plague that wiped out half the village." Reverend James' chest tightened. "The sickness?" "Yes," the young man confirmed. "It spread through the water. People bathed in the river, and they fell sick. No healer could save them. They rotted alive." Justin exchanged a glance with his boss. This was bigger than he had imagined. "So, the elders made a decision," the guard continued. "They declared that no one would ever bathe again. No one would wash, no one would cleanse their skin." A pastor gasped. "But that doesn't make sense. Diseases come from filth too." "We don't get sick anymore," the young guard whispered. "Not ever." Silence. Justin felt goosebumps rise on his skin. "What do you mean?" Reverend James demanded. The young guard's voice dropped even lower. "No one has fallen sick in this village for over 100 years." The words hung in the air like a curse. Justin's boss stepped forward. "That's impossible." The young guard looked him dead in the eyes. "It is impossible." He swallowed. "And yet, it is true." Reverend James turned to the older guards. "Where is my pastor?" The guards hesitated. "Where is he?" The old guards looked at each other. Then, one of them motioned toward the deepest part of the forest. "He was taken to the shrine." A cold dread settled over the group. "Shrine?" Mr. Caleb repeated. The young guard closed his eyes briefly, as if making a decision. Then, he turned to Reverend James. "I will take you there, Brother Deo." Justin gripped his camera tightly. Reverend James let out a slow, deep breath. "Lead the way." And with that, they ventured deeper into the cursed forest, toward the shrine that held their missing man. Toward the heart of the village's darkest secret. The shrine was a monstrous sight. Tall wooden effigies loomed over them, their carved faces twisted into grotesque expressions. Thick vines curled around the pillars, and the air reeked of decay, sweat, and something far worse, death. At the center of it all, a lone figure stood. The chief priest. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man draped in tattered robes of red and black, his skin painted with white chalk. He clutched a staff adorned with cowrie shells, shaking it violently. "You should not be here," he bellowed, his voice unnaturally deep. "The gods are watching." The moment his voice echoed through the shrine, something strange happened. The villagers who had followed them hesitated. Their faces paled with fear. Even Reverend James, Justin, and Mr. Caleb's group felt a cold dread creeping into their bones. Then, Reverend James burst into laughter. A deep, rolling laughter that shattered the tension like glass. The villagers blinked in confusion. The chief priest faltered. "You dare laugh at the gods?" Reverend James stepped forward. His voice, calm but powerful, cut through the thick air. "There are no gods here, only a frightened old man pretending to be one." The villagers gasped. The chief priest's eyes darted around, his hands gripping his staff tighter. Then Justin saw it, the truth hidden in plain sight. Near the back of the shrine, inside the chief priest's filthy tent, was the missing pastor. Tied to a wooden stump. Beside him, a bowl filled with a dark, foul-smelling concoction. Justin rushed forward, his heart pounding. "Pastor! Pastor, wake up!" The man's eyes fluttered weakly open. His lips were dry and cracked. "They tried to make me drink," his voice barely escaped his throat. Justin didn't wait. He grabbed the ropes and tore them off. Suddenly, the chief priest let out a horrifying wail. He grabbed a small, rusted blade from his robes, raising it high as if ready to strike. Crack! 2 security men from Mr. Caleb's retinue lunged forward. They grabbed the chief priest before he could make a move. He screamed, thrashed, and spat at them like a trapped animal. But it was over. The charade was over. Mr. Caleb stepped forward, his expression dark with anger. Justin's boss shoved a microphone into the chief priest's face. "Speak," he demanded. "Or spend a lifetime in jail." For a moment, the chief priest clenched his jaw. Then, he looked around. At the villagers. At the cameras. At Reverend James, whose piercing gaze held no fear. Something inside him crumbled. And then, he spoke. It was all a lie, he admitted. His voice, once powerful, now sounded weak. "The gods never forbade water." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The chief priest's hands trembled as he spoke, as though a lifetime of secrets were finally bleeding out. "The sickness of the past was real," he continued. "But it was never the water. It was a plague. And when it ended, the village elders feared it would return. They created the rule, and over time, it became our way of life." Justin's camera zoomed in. "But why did you keep the lie alive?" The chief priest's face twisted in shame. "Power," he muttered. "Control." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Whenever someone bathed, we poisoned them. We told the villagers that the gods had punished them. They believed us. They obeyed. And he swallowed hard. I ruled." Silence descended. Then, "Monster," someone shouted. The villagers erupted in rage. Cries of anger, disbelief, and grief filled the shrine. Justin's camera panned across the room. Scattered across the shrine floor, bones. So many bones. Skeletons of those who had unknowingly defied the fake curse. Reverend James closed his eyes. "How many?" he asked, his voice hollow. The chief priest's lips trembled. "I stopped counting after 100. A collective gasp of horror filled the shrine. Justin felt bile rise in his throat. Mr. Caleb's fists clenched. "You murdered innocent people. For what? Superstition? Fear?" The chief priest said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. 2 of the security men dragged him away. The sun had begun to rise. For the first time in over a century, the village stood on the edge of something new. Change. Freedom. Mr. Caleb wasted no time. His NGO brought in heavy machinery, rolling into the village like an unstoppable force of change. Bulldozers, water pumps, and pipelines transformed the landscape. The infamous river, once a source of fear, was drained and purified. Engineers constructed a dam, channeling clean water straight into every home. At first, the villagers watched from a distance. They collected the bottled water from the pastors, but the idea of touching their own stream still terrified them. Their ancestors had warned them. The spirits would strike. The plague would return. But the world was watching. News of the village's dark taboo had spread like wildfire. Journalists flocked to the site, capturing every moment as clean water finally flowed through the village. People cheered for Mr. Caleb's NGO. His name trended online, with international organizations recommending him for global humanitarian awards. Yet, despite the success, one final challenge remained. The villagers had clean water. But who would be the first to touch it? Who would defy the spirits? And what would happen when they did? The entire village stood on edge, waiting for the answer. On the day of the dam's grand opening, the entire village gathered. They stood at a distance, afraid to come too close to the flowing water. Would it bring healing? Or would the spirits strike? Under the bright sun, a wooden podium stood beside the fresh water, where journalists, engineers, and NGO workers watched in anticipation. Then, Reverend James stepped forward. Silence gripped the crowd. He bent down, cupped a handful of water, and took a big gulp. A murmur rippled through the villagers. He wiped his mouth. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he splashed the water on his face. A collective gasp erupted. Men staggered back. Women clutched their children. Even the elders stared, frozen. Any second now? The spirits would come. The plague would strike. Moments passed. Nothing happened. Reverend James smiled. He looked at the people, his face dripping, his voice calm. You see? There is no curse. The villagers whispered among themselves, unsure. Then, a young boy stepped forward hesitantly. He dipped his hand into the water. The crowd gasped again. He flinched, expecting something to happen. Nothing did. Then another child rushed forward. She scooped water into her hands and laughed. The fear began to crack. More villagers edged closer, their hands twitching with hesitation. But just as hope began to rise, a loud voice cut through the moment. Better be careful. All heads turned. It was Chief Rafa. His arms were crossed, his eyes dark with resentment. He had lost his power. And worse, he had made no money from the entire ordeal. His voice carried a bitter warning. The spirits do not forget. You may not see the punishment today, but it will come. Just wait. Fear crept back into the villagers' eyes. Some stepped away from the water. The chief smirked, satisfied. But then, splash. Without warning, Reverend James flung water all over him. The crowd gasped louder than before. Chief Rafa stood there, drenched from head to toe. Water dripped from his elaborate robes. The old chief's mouth fell open in shock. He staggered back. His body tensed, as if expecting to drop dead on the spot. The villagers held their breath. Seconds ticked by. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. Then, a woman chuckled. Another snorted. Then, like a flood breaking free, laughter erupted. People clutched their stomachs, roaring with amusement. Chief Rafa, once feared, once obeyed, stood soaked and humiliated. He looked down at himself, realizing the truth. He was still alive. No spirits. No plague. Nothing. And just like that, the fear of centuries shattered. A woman stepped boldly into the water and splashed her face. Another dipped her arms. Then, as if possessed by a mad excitement, villagers rushed forward, laughing, screaming, splashing. Fathers threw water on their sons. Children drenched their mothers. Even the elders, their eyes wide with disbelief, slowly joined in. For the first time in generations, the people of the village bathed. And nothing happened. No spirits. No death. Just joy. Just freedom. As Chief Rafa silently walked away, defeated, Reverend James raised his hands to the sky. It is finished. The crowd cheered. And somewhere, in the depths of the jungle, the old spirits of deception faded into nothingness. The world watched in amazement as news of the village's transformation spread. What was once a cursed land where water was feared had become a place where people couldn't get enough of it. Social media exploded with videos of children playing in the river, elders enjoying their first baths in years, and women fetching clean water without fear. Journalists and influencers flooded the village, eager to witness the miracle firsthand. Memes popped up everywhere. One showed Chief Rafa drenched, with the caption, "First time bathing in history?" Another had Reverend James holding a bucket, saying, "Baptism 2.0." A third showed villagers splashing each other with reckless joy, labeled, "From drought to drip." Hashtag "The village that loves water too much" became the most unexpected viral movement of the year. Justin, once just a curious journalist, became a national sensation. His documentary exposing the deception behind the no bathing taboo won multiple awards. Big media houses fought for interviews with him. Government officials invited him to consult on rural development projects. Companies lined up with sponsorship deals. And before he knew it, he was no longer just a journalist. He was a game changer. Reverend James, once an outsider, was now a beloved spiritual leader. He established a new branch of his church in the village, offering both spiritual guidance and practical solutions. He worked with local youths to build schools, healthcare centers, and modern sanitation systems. The same villagers who once feared water as a curse now prayed for rain, farmed successfully, and celebrated baptisms with overflowing joy. The church flourished. Faith was rekindled. And the village, once known for its dark past, was now a beacon of light and renewal. Meanwhile, Mr. Caleb's NGO, which had tirelessly worked to bring clean water and sanitation, received the highest honor in the country. At a grand ceremony, he was awarded the National Humanitarian Impact Award for transforming lives and rewriting history. Foreign organizations offered grants. International news channels covered his work. Governments requested his expertise to replicate the success story in other regions. What started as a mission to bring water became a revolution that changed lives forever. Years later, the once forgotten community became a model village. Schools taught the next generation about hygiene and progress. The river, once dreaded, became a source of life. Tourists came just to witness the legendary transformation. And at the entrance of the village, a grand sign stood proudly. "Welcome to the village that loves water too much." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Where fear drowned, and faith rose." Please subscribe.